If you are enjoying this video, smash that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell. Share it with your friends, and let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Every like and subscribe helps the channel grow. My name is Thomas Whitaker, but everyone calls me Tom. I've been a ranger at Redwood National Park for 15 years now, and what I'm about to tell you happened in the autumn of 1963. I know some people might not believe my story, but every word of it is true. I used to love my job, walking among those giant redwoods, helping lost hikers, and making sure everyone was safe. The trees here are ancient, reaching so high into the sky that sometimes you can't even see their tops through the fog. But after what happened that autumn, I've never looked at these woods the same way again. I still remember how it all started. The weather had turned unusually cold for October. Strange, thick fog would roll in without warning, making the forest look like something from another world. My fellow rangers joked about it, saying Mother Nature was confused. If only we had known what that cold really meant. It had been 2 years since I lost Sarah, my wife, to cancer. The forest became my escape, my way of dealing with the loneliness. Maybe that's why I noticed things others didn't, little details that seemed wrong. You see, after spending 15 years in these woods, and before that serving in Korea, you develop a kind of sixth sense about danger. The forest has its own language, and I had learned to understand it. That autumn, the forest was trying to tell us something. The animals were acting strange. Birds stopped singing in certain areas, deer would run at the slightest sound, and even the hardy raccoons seemed to vanish from some parts of the park. But nobody paid attention to these warning signs. Why would they? Redwood National Park was supposed to be safe, just a beautiful place where families came to make happy memories. I remember standing at my usual spot near Devil's Creek one evening, watching the sun set behind the massive trees. The cold wind carried a smell I'd never encountered before, like old ice and decay. Looking back now, that was the first real sign that something terrible had entered our forest, something that would change all our lives forever. If I had known then what I know now, maybe I could have prevented what happened next. Maybe those people would still be alive. But how do you prepare for something that shouldn't exist? Something that turns everything you believe about the world upside down? This is the story of the darkest winter of my life, and of the thing we came to call the Bone Collector. A creature that brought death and terror to our peaceful forest, and taught me that some legends are better left undisturbed. I'm telling this story now because people need to know the truth. They need to understand what really happened in the Redwood Forest during those terrible months. And most importantly, they need to be ready, because I fear it might not be over. It started with 3 missing hikers. Just another search and rescue mission, or so I thought. Mike, my fellow ranger, called me on the radio early one morning. "Tom, you need to see this." His voice was shaking. "Up by Bear Ridge Trail. I've never just come quickly." I drove my Jeep as far as I could, then hiked the rest of the way. The morning fog was thick, making everything look gray and ghostly. When I reached Mike, I knew something was terribly wrong. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling as he pointed toward a small clearing. What I saw there still haunts my dreams. 3 bodies, frozen solid. But that wasn't the strange part. It was 65 degrees outside. They were sitting in a perfect circle, like they had been carefully placed there. Their faces showed pure terror, frozen in their last moments. But what really made my blood run cold was what we found when the medical team examined them. Specific bones were missing from each body, removed with surgical precision. "This isn't normal, Tom," Mike whispered. "No animal does this." He was right. In all my years as a ranger, I'd seen animal attacks, accidents, and everything in between. But this was different. This was planned. That evening, I visited Old Joe, a Native American elder who lived near the park. His people had been here for generations. If anyone knew anything, it would be him. As I told him what we found, his dark eyes grew wide with fear. He got up slowly and walked to an old chest, pulling out some yellowed papers. "The cold walker," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Our people have known about it for centuries. It comes when the weather turns strange, when the forest goes quiet." He showed me ancient drawings of a tall, skeletal creature with antlers. I didn't want to believe it. It had to be some crazy person, right? But then we found the ice patches, perfectly round circles of ice appearing on warm days, and the whispers started. Hikers reported hearing voices calling for help, voices that led them deeper into the woods. Things got worse fast. Mike and I spent days searching the forest, looking for any clues we could find. The air kept getting colder, and the fog seemed to follow us everywhere. One evening, Mike spotted something strange near an old cave. "Tom, look at this," he called out, shining his flashlight on the cave wall. There were paintings there, really old ones, showing the same creature old Joe had warned us about. The paintings showed it hunting, collecting bones, and disappearing during warm seasons. "I'm going to check deeper inside," Mike said, taking a step into the cave. "Wait," I called after him. "We should stick together." But he was already moving forward, his flashlight beam bouncing off the wet walls. That was the last time I saw Mike alive. I heard his scream echo through the cave, followed by a sound I can't even describe, like ice cracking and trees groaning all at once. By the time I reached where he had been, all I found was his flashlight, still on, pointing at a wall covered in fresh ice. The next few days were a blur of search parties and questions. Nobody could explain what happened to Mike, but I knew. Deep down, I knew what we were dealing with. More strange things started happening. We found dead animals high up in the trees, frozen solid. Their bones were missing too. Hikers reported hearing Mike's voice calling for help from deep in the forest, but it couldn't be him. We all knew he was gone. I started spending my nights reading everything I could find about the creature. Old Joe brought me more stories passed down through his tribe. They called it a Wendigo, but this was different from the usual legends. This one was ancient, something that had been here as long as the redwoods themselves. One night, while reading through the old papers, I found something important. The creature needed bones, lots of them, to prepare for its long sleep. It only woke up every few decades when the weather turned strange, and it had to finish collecting before the winter solstice. I marked the date on my calendar, the 21st of December. We had less than 2 months to stop it. But how do you fight something that isn't supposed to exist? Something that can freeze you solid with just a touch? I was about to find out in the worst possible way. The next morning, while checking the radio reports, I heard something that made my heart stop. A family of 4 had just set up camp in Devil's Creek area, right in the creature's hunting grounds. I grabbed my gear and ran to my Jeep. I had to get to them before it did. But as I drove through the foggy forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting. I was too late for the family. What I found at their campsite still gives me nightmares. They were arranged in a circle, just like the first victims, frozen solid with their bones carefully removed. I had to look away while calling it in. But that night, something happened that changed everything. I was walking back to my Jeep when I heard it, Mike's voice, calling for help. "Tom, help me, I'm hurt." I knew it couldn't really be Mike. I knew he was gone. But it sounded exactly like him. Against my better judgment, I followed the voice. The fog was thick, and my flashlight barely cut through it. The voice led me to an ancient grove of redwoods, trees so old they were here before any of us. That's when I saw it. Between the trees stood something that shouldn't exist. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. Its gray skin was stretched tight over its bones, and on its head were huge antlers with, oh God, there were human skulls impaled on them. Its eyes were black holes that somehow reflected the starlight, and its fingers, those horrible long fingers ended in claws that looked like icicles. It was crouched over something, a fresh kill, probably a deer. I could hear the crack of bones as it fed. I tried to stay quiet, to back away slowly, but my foot hit a branch. The snap seemed as loud as a gunshot in the quiet forest. It turned its head, completely around, like an owl. Those star-filled eyes locked onto me. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. Behind me, I heard something moving through the trees, but not on the ground. It was in the branches above. I barely made it to my Jeep. As I drove away, my headlights caught something in the rearview mirror. A tall figure standing in the middle of the road, watching me leave. The next few days were horrible. More people went missing. John Murray, our best local guide, was found half frozen but somehow still alive. Before he died in the hospital, he kept mumbling about the cold that walks and the hunger in its eyes. Then we found the ranger logs from the 1920s. Similar deaths, similar missing bones, similar ice patterns, all happening during an unusually cold autumn, just like now. Mike and I decided to keep patrolling together. Safety in numbers, we thought. If only we had known that wouldn't be enough. That's when the radio calls started getting strange. Static-filled messages with whispers we couldn't quite make out. And one night, while checking the Devil's Creek area, we found something that made everything much worse. A tree covered in frozen blood, with claw marks higher than any bear could reach. We were dealing with something impossible, something that wasn't supposed to exist, and it was just getting started. 2 teenage campers were next. We found them, up in the trees. I had to stop other rangers from quitting right there and then. How could I tell them that running away wouldn't help? This thing wasn't going to stop. I went back to old Joe. He looked at me with sad eyes and said, "You've seen it, haven't you?" When I nodded, he pulled out an old leather book. "There might be a way to stop it," he said, "but you're not going to like it." As he explained the ritual to me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. To stop this thing, someone would have to get close to it, very close. And the price of failure would be worse than death. But what choice did we have? The winter solstice was getting closer, and the creature was getting bolder. It was time to end this, one way or another. Old Joe's book described an ancient ritual. Sacred fire made from special herbs and redwood sap. It was the only thing that could hurt the creature. I spent 3 days preparing everything, knowing I might only get one chance. The 21st of December came too quickly, the winter solstice. I tracked the creature to an old burial cave deep in the forest. Ice covered everything nearby, even though it was 50 degrees out. I could hear voices, all the voices of the people it had killed, calling out like a horrible choir. Just as I reached the cave entrance, I heard screams, real ones this time. A group of hikers had ignored the warning signs and wandered right into the creature's lair. I had no choice. I had to go in now. The cave was like walking into a freezer. My breath came out in thick clouds. The walls were covered in ice and bones. So many bones, arranged in strange patterns. My flashlight beam showed me the way deeper inside. Then I heard it, that awful sound of joints popping and bones cracking. The creature was there, cornering 3 terrified hikers. Without thinking, I shouted, "Hey, over here!" It turned, and in the flashlight beam, I saw those terrible star-filled eyes again. The hikers ran past me, toward the exit. The creature let them go. It wanted me. "Remember me?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I've been looking for you." It made a sound like icicles breaking and started moving toward me. Fast. I grabbed my backpack and pulled out what I needed, the special torch I'd prepared, already lit. The creature hesitated when it saw the flame. For the first time, I saw fear in those black eyes. It screamed, a sound that made my ears ring, and lunged at me. I rolled away, but not fast enough. Its claws caught my left hand. The pain was incredible, like my blood was turning to ice, but I had to keep going. I swung the torch, and where the flames touched it, the creature's gray skin began to smoke and crack. We fought in that ice-covered cave, me with my burning torch, it with its freezing claws. I was getting tired, my left hand useless from frostbite. But I remembered Mike, the family, all the others it had killed. I couldn't give up. Finally, I backed it into a corner. The sacred fire was working. Its skin was cracking all over. With one last scream that shook the whole cave, it charged at me. I ducked and thrust the torch upward with all my strength. The creature burst into blue flames. Its screams made the cave walls crack. Rocks started falling. I ran for the entrance as the cave began collapsing behind me. I made it out just in time. The cave entrance sealed itself with tons of rock, trapping the burning creature inside. They found me passed out near the cave entrance. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital. The doctors couldn't save my left hand, it was too badly frozen. But I was alive, which is more than I could say for many others. The official report called it a series of unexplained accidents. Nobody wanted to write down what really happened. The 3 hikers I saved that day backed up my story, but people just nodded and looked away when they heard it. It's funny how people can ignore things they don't want to believe. I still work as a ranger in Redwood National Park. Someone needs to keep watch. You see, Old Joe warned me that the cave might not hold it forever. The creature is ancient, patient. It can wait decades if it needs to. Sometimes, on cold autumn nights, I find patches of ice in places where ice shouldn't be. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, I think I hear whispers on the wind, voices calling for help. The area around the cave is off limits now, marked as dangerous due to unstable ground. But every year, thrill seekers try to find it. They've heard the stories, seen the pictures of the strange ice formations that still appear sometimes. Old Joe's people perform a ritual every year to keep the creature sleeping. I join them now. It's the least I can do. My left hand aches when the weather turns cold, a reminder that what happened was real. I keep a detailed journal of everything I know about the creature. Someone needs to be ready if it ever comes back. The younger rangers think I'm just a crazy old man with his scary stories. But I see them get nervous when the fog rolls in thick, or when they hear strange sounds in the forest at night. They're right to be afraid, because deep in the redwood forest, beneath tons of rock and earth, something ancient is sleeping. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, if you listen carefully near that old cave, you can hear the sound of ice slowly cracking. So, if you're ever hiking in Redwood National Park, and you feel a sudden chill on a warm day, or hear voices calling you deeper into the woods, run. Run as fast as you can. Because not all legends are just stories, and some things are better left undisturbed. And remember, the creature they call the Bone Collector might be sleeping, but it isn't dead. It's waiting. And winter always comes again. My name is Marcus Davidson, but everyone around here calls me Red. I guess that's what happens when you've got a beard that looks like it's been dipped in rust. I've been a ranger here at Shoshone National Forest for nearly 20 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Boy, was I wrong. I should probably mention that I wasn't always just a ranger. Back in the day, I used to be a smoke jumper. You know, one of those crazy folks who jump out of planes to fight forest fires. That was until '72, when things went bad. Real bad. I lost some good friends that day, and these burn scars on my arms remind me of it every morning. Now I walk with a bit of a limp, but I still do my job, keeping these forests safe. It all started in the summer of '77. We were in the middle of a pretty nasty drought, and something felt different about the forest. Wrong somehow. I've spent enough time in these woods to know when things aren't right, and let me tell you, something was definitely not right. The first thing I noticed was the wolves, or rather, the lack of them. Usually you'd hear them howling at night, especially during a full moon, but they were gone. Just gone. Like they knew something we didn't. Even the regular wildlife seemed scared, hiding away in their dens and nests. I remember sitting in my cabin one night, looking out at Thunder Basin under that full moon, when I heard it. A howl that made my blood run cold. It wasn't like any wolf I'd ever heard. It was almost human, but not quite. That's when I knew we were in for something big, something terrible. Little did I know that howl was just the beginning of what would become the most terrifying summer of my life. The next morning, I got a call that changed everything. Jimmy, one of the local ranchers, was panicking about his cattle. When I drove out to his ranch, what I saw made my stomach turn. 3 of his cows were dead, but it wasn't like any animal attack I'd seen before. They were torn apart in ways that didn't make sense, like something had been playing with them. "Red," Jimmy said, his hand shaking as he lit a cigarette, "I've dealt with wolves and bears all my life. This ain't either of those." I knelt down to look at the tracks around the carcasses. They were huge, bigger than any wolf print I'd ever seen. But what really got me was how they changed. At first, they looked like wolf tracks. Then they started looking more human. I didn't tell Jimmy that part. Some things are better left unsaid. That same week, hikers started going missing. First, it was a young couple who never came back from their camping trip. Then, a solo hiker disappeared near Thunder Basin. We found their backpack torn to shreds, hanging from a tree branch 20 feet up. No animal I knew could do that. The worst part was the feeling of being watched. During my patrols, I'd catch glimpses of something moving through the trees. Sometimes, when I was alone in my truck at night, I'd see eyes reflecting in my headlights. Amber-colored eyes way too high off the ground to be any normal animal. One evening, Old Joe from the Shoshone tribe came to my station. He was one of the tribal elders, and I'd never seen him look so worried. "The old stories," he said, sitting heavily in my office chair, "they're coming true. The Moonwalker has returned." "Moonwalker?" I asked. "A creature that walks between 2 worlds, man and beast. It comes during the full moon cycle, hunting for souls." He looked me straight in the eye. "And it's hungry, Red. Very hungry." I wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but after what I'd seen, well, let's just say I started keeping my rifle a lot closer at night. That's when we got the call about the first body. The first body we found was Paul Matthews, one of our newest rangers. I wish I could forget what I saw that day. We found him in a clearing, and, well, it looked like something had been playing with him, just like those cattle. The worst part? His face was frozen in pure terror, like he'd seen something his mind couldn't handle. That's when things got serious. The Forest Service sent in a team, including Dr. Laura Henderson, a wildlife expert who was supposed to figure out what kind of animal was doing this. But I knew better. No normal animal leaves claw marks that change from wolf to human fingerprints in the same scratch. "Red," Laura said one evening as we were reviewing evidence, "these attacks don't match any known predator patterns. And look at this." She showed me some old photographs from the 1930s. Same area, same type of attacks, same time of year. We started night patrols in groups of 3. Nobody went anywhere alone anymore. I remember the night everything went really wrong. We were checking out reports of strange noises near Thunder Basin when our radios started acting up. Just static and this weird, low howling sound coming through. Then we heard Tim Fuller screaming. He was only about 50 yards away, but by the time we got there, we were too late. James Cooper was with him, both of them just gone. We found their flashlights, still on, pointing at the trees. That's when I saw it for the first time. Through the beam of my flashlight, standing between 2 pine trees, it was huge, at least 8 feet tall. It looked like a wolf, but it was standing on 2 legs. Its fur was black as night with silver streaks, like it was made of moonlight and shadows. But its eyes, those glowing amber eyes, they weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, evil intelligence. It smiled at me. That's what still haunts me. It had rows of teeth, like a shark, and it actually smiled. Before I could even raise my rifle, it was gone. Just vanished into the darkness. But we could hear it laughing, a sound between a wolf's howl and a human laugh that echoed through the trees. I knew then we weren't dealing with just any predator. This was something else, something older, something that shouldn't exist in our world. After that night, I knew we needed a plan. We couldn't just keep watching people die. I gathered the remaining team at the main ranger station, just 5 of us left now. That's when Old Joe showed up again. this time carrying a worn leather bag. "I've been watching," he said, laying out some strange-looking items on my desk. "It's not just any skinwalker. It's an ancient one, and it's getting stronger with each kill." He pulled out an old silver spear tip, dark with age. This was used before, many moons ago, to fight it. Silver is its weakness. I'm not usually one for supernatural stuff, but after what I'd seen, well, I wasn't about to ignore any help. We melted down some silver items and made bullets. Sounds crazy, I know, but we were desperate. That's when the weather turned bad. Dark clouds rolled in, but the full moon still managed to peek through, making everything look weird and shadowy. We decided to make our stand at the old fire tower. It was the highest point around, and at least we could see what was coming. The first night in the tower was quiet. Too quiet. No cricket sounds, no owl hoots, nothing. Just dead silence. Around midnight, we started hearing them. Wolves, lots of them, circling the tower. But these weren't normal wolves. Their eyes glowed the same amber color as the creatures. "It's controlling them," whispered Sarah, our youngest ranger. "Like some kind of pack leader." Then we heard it, that horrible half-human laugh again, closer this time. The wolves started howling all at once, and the sound. It was like they were singing some kind of horrible song. The radio crackled to life, but instead of static, we heard voices, voices of people we knew were dead, calling for help. It was trying to trick us into coming out. I gripped my rifle, loaded with those silver bullets, and watched the tree line. The creature was out there, playing with us, waiting for someone to break. Things went bad fast that night. One of our team members, Mike, couldn't take the voices anymore. He thought he heard his brother calling for help, his brother who'd been missing for 2 weeks. Before we could stop him, he ran down the tower stairs. "Mike, no!" I shouted, but it was too late. The moment he hit the ground, shadows moved. We heard his scream, then silence. The wolves had stopped howling too. That's when it showed itself again. The creature stepped into the moonlight, standing upright like a man but looking like something from a nightmare. It stared right up at us in the tower, those amber eyes glowing brighter than before. In its clawed hand, it held Mike's rifle like it was a toy. Sarah started crying quietly. John, our other ranger, just kept whispering, "This isn't real, this isn't real." But it was real, too real. The creature started climbing the tower, not like an animal, like a person, using the ladder rungs. The whole tower shook with each step it took. I could hear its claws scraping against the metal. "The silver," old Joe reminded us. "Remember the silver." I aimed my rifle, trying to keep my hands steady. The creature was almost at the top now. I could smell it, like wet fur and something rotting. It reached one massive, clawed hand over the railing. I fired. The sound was so loud in the small tower space that my ears rang. The creature screamed, not a howl, but a scream that sounded almost human. It fell back, crashing through the branches below. But I knew it wasn't over. The wound would only make it angry. As if reading my thoughts, we heard that terrible laugh again, followed by a sound I'll never forget, the screech of claws on metal, coming from all sides of the tower. It wasn't alone anymore, and we were running out of silver bullets. What happened next still gives me nightmares. The tower started shaking violently. There wasn't just one creature anymore, but 2 or 3 of them, all trying to get to us. Old Joe grabbed his bag and pulled out the ancient silver spear tip, quickly tying it to a broken pole. "Red," he said, his voice steady despite everything, "there's one way to end this. We need to get to the sacred grounds. It's where they buried the last one decades ago." Just then, the tower's metal screamed as huge claws ripped through one side. Sarah screamed too. One of the creatures had its arm through the hole, reaching for her. John fired his last silver bullet, and the arm withdrew with an angry roar. "We have to move now," I shouted. The tower was going to collapse any minute. We had one chance, the emergency zip line we used for quick evacuations during forest fires. It would take us right over the trees, towards the direction of the sacred grounds. Old Joe went first, then Sarah. John was next, but as he was clipping on his harness, the whole tower gave a massive shudder. One of the creatures had rammed into the base. The tower was starting to lean. "Go!" I yelled at John, helping him clip in. He zipped away just as the tower started to fall. I grabbed the last harness, but I wasn't fast enough. As the tower collapsed, I jumped, barely managing to clip the harness. I swung out into the darkness, the creatures howling behind me. Below me, the controlled wolves were running through the trees, following my path. Above, the full moon was starting to turn red. The lunar eclipse was beginning. Old Joe had said this would be our only chance to end it. But as I sailed through the dark, I could hear something following through the trees, moving faster than anything should be able to move, and it was gaining on us. We all made it to the ground, but we weren't safe. Not even close. The sacred grounds were still a quarter-mile away, and the creatures were closing in. We could hear them crashing through the trees behind us, their horrible laughs getting closer. "Run!" I shouted, helping Sarah up after she stumbled. "Don't look back." But I did look back. I wish I hadn't. In the red moonlight, I saw them clearly for the first time, 3 massive shapes, running on 2 legs, their silver-streaked fur glowing like ghost fire. The biggest one, the one I'd shot earlier, was leading the pack. Old Joe was struggling to keep up. He was clutching the silver spear, mumbling something in his native language. Suddenly, he stopped. "Go!" he yelled at us. "I'll hold them back. Red, you know what to do with the spear." Before I could stop him, he threw me the spear and pulled out a small pouch. He scattered some kind of powder in a circle around himself and started chanting louder. The creatures reached him just as we made it to the sacred grounds, an old burial site marked with weathered totem poles. I heard Old Joe's last shout, then a bright flash lit up the forest. When I looked back, he was gone, but so were 2 of the creatures. But the biggest one, the alpha, was still coming, and now it looked angrier than ever. "The circle," Sarah pointed to an old stone ring in the ground. "Old Joe said we need to get it inside." The lunar eclipse was almost complete now. The monster burst into the clearing, its amber eyes blazing with hatred. It was hurt and bleeding from my earlier shot, but that only made it more dangerous. I gripped the silver spear tightly, knowing I had only one chance to end this nightmare. The creature charged straight at us. I pushed Sarah and John behind me, holding the silver spear out front. The monster was massive up close, its hot breath smelling like death, those rows of sharp teeth gleaming in the red moonlight. "Get into the circle!" I yelled to Sarah and John. They scrambled backwards while I faced the beast. My hands were shaking, but I knew I couldn't miss. Not now. Too many people had died already. The creature lunged at me, and I rolled to the side, feeling its claws graze my shoulder. The pain was intense, but I kept moving. I had to get it into the stone circle. Then I noticed something. It was getting weaker. The eclipse was almost complete, and with each passing second, the creature's movements became slower. This was our chance. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping into the circle. "Come and get me!" It worked. The monster charged straight into the circle. The moment it crossed the stone boundary, a strange light began glowing from the ground. The creature howled, not in anger this time, but in fear. I didn't hesitate. With every bit of strength I had left, I drove the silver spear straight into its chest. The monster's scream was deafening, like 1,000 wolves howling at once. Its body began to change, shifting between wolf and human forms, faster and faster. The ground started shaking. The stone circle erupted with bright blue fire. The creature tried to escape, but it was trapped. As the eclipse reached its peak, the monster burst into flames. Not normal flames, but blue fire that seemed to come from inside it. Then everything went quiet. The creature was gone, leaving nothing but ashes and a scorch mark in the stone circle. But as we stood there, catching our breath, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Far off in the forest, a single wolf pup's howl. It sounded different. Almost human-like. Some say evil never really dies. It just waits for the right time to return. My name is Jack Hawthorne, and I wish I could forget what happened on Mount Baker that winter. But some things stick with you forever, just like the freezing cold that took 3 of my fingers. I'd been doing mountain rescues for 15 years, ever since I left the Army Rangers. The mountains had always been my home, my safe place. Well, at least until that November of 1985. You see, people had been going missing up there. Not just the usual lost hikers, but experienced climbers too. They'd vanish without a trace, like the mountain just swallowed them whole. I remember sitting in my cabin, looking at the reports spread across my desk. 6 people gone in 3 months. The weird part? All their equipment was found frozen solid, even on days when it wasn't that cold. Local Native Americans had been warning people to stay away, talking about something they called the Cold One. I should have listened. The morning I got the call about another missing group, something felt different. The fog on the mountain was thick, unnaturally thick, and it seemed to glow in places. My radio kept crackling with static, and my compass needle wouldn't stop spinning. Deep down, I knew this wasn't going to be a normal rescue mission. I gathered my team, the best mountain rescue specialists in Washington State. There was Michael O'Brien, tough as nails and never scared of anything. Dr. Rachel Turner, our medical expert who could patch up anyone in any condition. Kevin Patterson, who knew these trails better than his own backyard. Then there were Rangers David Miller and Thomas Wright, and Mark Lewis, our photographer, who insisted on documenting everything. None of us knew we were walking into a nightmare. None of us knew that most of us wouldn't make it back down. We started climbing early that morning. The air was colder than usual, the kind of cold that bites right through your thick jacket. Something wasn't right. I could feel it in my bones. 20 years in the mountains teaches you to trust your gut. "Jack, come look at this," Rachel called out. She was pointing at some ice formations on the rocks. They looked like frozen waterfalls, but it wasn't nearly cold enough for that. And the strangest thing? They seemed to be growing right before our eyes. Kevin, our guide, kept checking his map and scratching his head. "This doesn't make sense," he muttered. "These landmarks, they're all wrong." That was our first real warning sign. Kevin never got lost, not once in his 12 years on Mount Baker. The fog rolled in around noon. Not the normal mountain fog that comes and goes. This was different. It moved like it was alive, swirling in patterns I'd never seen before. Our radios stopped working completely, and the batteries in our flashlights were draining faster than normal. "We should turn back," Michael suggested, his voice shaking slightly. Michael O'Brien, who'd never shown fear in his life, was scared. That's when I knew we were in real trouble. But we couldn't turn back. There were people up there who needed our help. So we pushed on, climbing higher into that strange fog. The temperature kept dropping, even though it was only mid-afternoon. Then we heard it, a sound that still haunts my dreams. Like ice cracking, but mixed with something that almost sounded like whispers. Mark tried to take photos, but his camera was frozen solid, even though it had been working fine minutes before. "Look!" Thomas suddenly shouted, pointing ahead. Through the fog, we saw something that made my blood run cold. There, stuck in a wall of ice, was a climbing boot. And inside it, well, that's when our rescue mission turned into something much darker. We gathered around the boot in the ice wall. As we got closer, we could see it wasn't just a boot. There was a whole body frozen inside, one of the missing climbers. The strange thing was, he looked like he was running from something when he got frozen. "This is impossible," Rachel whispered, touching the ice. "A person can't freeze this fast. And this ice, it's not normal ice." That's when things started getting worse. The fog grew thicker, and the temperature dropped so low our breath turned into ice crystals before our eyes. Then Michael screamed. "Something touched me. Something cold," he yelled, spinning around. But there was nothing there, just swirling mist. We huddled together, all 6 of us, backs against each other. Our headlamps barely cut through the fog anymore. Then we saw it, a shape in the mist. At first, it looked like a person made of glass, but then it changed. It moved like water, but was made of ice, with eyes that glowed blue like frozen fire. "Run!" I shouted. But where could we run? The fog was everywhere. Michael was the first one we lost. He was just a few steps behind me when I heard him gasp. When I turned around, he was already covered in frost, his eyes wide with fear. Before any of us could reach him, he was frozen solid. "This way," Kevin yelled, pointing to a cave entrance. We ran inside, but that was another mistake. The cave was like a maze of ice tunnels, and that thing, that ice creature, it could move through the walls like they were nothing. Rachel grabbed my arm. "Jack, look at these," she said, shining her light on the cave walls. There were carvings everywhere, old ones, showing pictures of something that looked just like what we saw in the fog. The Native Americans had known about this thing all along. We were trapped in that cave system, being hunted by something that shouldn't exist, and we were running out of time. The cave turned into our worst nightmare. We could hear that thing moving through the ice walls, making sounds like breaking glass. Rachel tried to read the cave drawings with her flashlight, saying something about an ancient spirit that guards the mountain. Then we heard Kevin scream. It was coming from a tunnel to our left. When we got there, all we found was his backpack. The rest of him just disappeared into the glacier. Right before our eyes, like he'd been pulled into the ice itself. "The drawings," Rachel said, her voice shaking. "They show the creature taking people into the ice, keeping them forever." But before she could tell us more, the air around her turned freezing cold. In seconds, she turned into what looked like an ice statue. Then she just shattered. I'll never forget that sound. David and Thomas tried to run, but they took a wrong turn. We found them later, frozen together like statues in a museum. Mark kept taking pictures, thinking someone needed to document this. "People need to know what's up here," he said. Those were his last words before the mist surrounded him, and he just dissolved into it. I was alone now, trapped in these ice tunnels with that thing hunting me, but something about those cave drawings stuck in my mind. There was one that showed the creature backing away from something, some kind of tribal artifact. Then I remembered. In one of the frozen climber's backpacks, I'd seen something like it, a small carved stone with strange markings. I had grabbed it earlier, thinking it might be important. Now it was my only hope. The creature appeared in front of me, its icy body glowing with that strange blue light. But this time, I didn't run. I had nowhere left to run anyway. I pulled out the carved stone, holding it tight in my shaking hands. The creature moved closer, its icy form changing shapes like flowing water. The cold was so intense that my fingers started turning blue. But something strange happened. When I held up the stone, the creature stopped. The blue flames in its eyes flickered like it was afraid. That's when I noticed more carvings on the cave wall behind it, lit up by my last working flashlight. They showed the stone being used to trap the creature in a deep crack in the glacier. The creature lunged at me, but the stone seemed to push it back. I started moving, forcing it to retreat deeper into the caves. My fingers were freezing. I could barely feel them anymore, but I couldn't let go of that stone. We ended up in a massive ice chamber with a huge crack in the floor, a crevasse that seemed bottomless. The creature split into multiple forms, trying to confuse me, but the stone glowed brighter. I remembered the carvings and knew what I had to do. I started speaking the words carved on the stone. I didn't know what they meant, but they felt powerful in my mouth. The creature screamed, a sound like breaking icicles in winter wind. The ground shook, and the crevasse started glowing with a strange blue light. The creature tried one last attack. As it rushed toward me, I threw the stone into the crevasse. There was a flash of bright blue light, and the creature got pulled down into the crack like water down a drain. The last thing I saw were those blue flame eyes, disappearing into the darkness. The whole cave started shaking. I ran as fast as I could, following my old footprints. 3 of my fingers were completely frozen. I lost them later at the hospital. But I was alive. They found me stumbling down the mountain the next morning. I was half frozen and barely making sense, talking about ice creatures and glowing stones. Of course, nobody believed me. They said the cold and fear had made me imagine things. 2 other members of another rescue team survived. They had stayed behind at base camp because of equipment problems. Lucky for them. When they asked about our team, I couldn't find the words to explain what really happened. The official report said it was an avalanche. They never found the bodies of my teammates. The mountain kept them, just like it had kept all the others before. I tried to tell people about the creature, about the ancient carvings in the cave. But the strangest thing happened. When search teams went up there, they couldn't find the cave system. It was like it had never existed. But I know it's still there. Every winter, when the first snow falls, people go missing on Mount Baker. Their equipment is found frozen solid, just like before. The locals won't go near certain parts of the mountain anymore, especially when the fog rolls in. I quit mountain rescue after that. My frozen fingers are a constant reminder of what happened. Sometimes, on cold nights, I can still hear that ice-cracking whisper in my dreams. The creature is still there, I'm sure of it. Maybe that ancient stone just put it to sleep for a while. The Native Americans say it wakes up every few years, hungry for more victims. And when I look up at Mount Baker on foggy days, sometimes I see strange blue lights in the mist. So if you're ever hiking on Mount Baker and you see an unusual fog rolling in, or if you hear what sounds like whispers in the wind, don't stop to take pictures. Don't try to be brave, just run. Run as fast as you can. Because the Mist Dweller of Mount Baker is always watching, always waiting for its next victim. And not everyone gets as lucky as I did. My name is Frank Rodriguez, and I need to tell you about what happened in Dead Man's Hollow back in '69. Even now, after all these years, my hands shake when I think about those nights under the blood-red moon. But someone needs to know the truth. I was 41 then, working as the head ranger in the Adirondack Mountains after leaving the Marines. Vietnam had left its marks on me, not just the missing left ear, but the memories that kept me up at night. I thought I'd seen the worst of what the world had to offer in those jungles. Boy, was I wrong. It all started in late autumn. You know that time of year when the air gets sharp and crisp and the trees stand like dark soldiers against the sky? Something felt different that year. The nights were darker than usual, and the harvest moon hung low and red, like a wound in the sky. The locals started calling it blood moon season. I remember sitting in my ranger station one evening, looking at my reflection in the window, my dark face, sharp features, and that stubble I could never quite get rid of. The radio crackled with the usual evening check-ins from my team. Everything seemed normal, except for this weird feeling in my gut. 20 years in the Marines taught me to trust that feeling. The first sign that something was wrong came when old Bill, a local hunter, stumbled into my station. His face was white as paper, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. "Frank," he said, "there's something out there, something in the trees." I'd heard all sorts of stories from scared campers before, but something in Bill's eyes made me listen. That was just the beginning. None of us knew then that those dense pine forests around Dead Man's Hollow were hiding something. Something that had been waiting, watching, and getting hungry. I wish I could say I was prepared for what came next, but how do you prepare for something that isn't supposed to exist? It was a cold Tuesday morning when I got the call. A hunter hadn't come home the night before, and his wife was worried sick. Just another lost hiker, I thought. We got calls like this all the time, especially during hunting season. But something about this one felt different. I grabbed my gear and headed out with my team. The morning fog was thick, making the pine trees look like ghosts in the mist. As we walked deeper into the forest, I noticed something strange. There was no sound. No birds singing, no squirrels rushing through the trees. Just silence. That's when we found the first clue. There were weird marks on the trees, like something had climbed them, but not like any bear marks I'd ever seen. These were different. Long, straight scratches that went all the way up into the branches. "Frank," called out Bill Foster, one of my younger rangers, "you need to see this." I walked over to where he was standing, and my blood ran cold. Above us, about 30 feet up in a pine tree, was a boot. Just one boot, hanging there like someone had placed it carefully on a branch. And next to it, well, I'd rather not say what we found next. Over the next few days, more people went missing. 3 hunters, then a camping couple, then a group of hikers. Each time, we'd find their belongings in the trees. Sometimes higher, sometimes lower, but always in the trees. The locals started talking. Some said it was a bear, others blamed mountain lions. But I'd fought in Vietnam. I'd seen what animals could do. This was something else. The way things were placed, the careful arrangement of what we found, whatever was doing this was smart, and it was watching us. One night, while doing my rounds at the ranger station, I heard it for the first time. A clicking sound, like someone tapping on hollow wood, but faster and with a pattern. It was coming from the darkness between the trees. I shined my flashlight out there, but all I saw were shadows moving, in ways shadows shouldn't move. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with any normal predator. Something was hunting in our woods, something that didn't belong here. And it was getting bolder with each passing day. Things got worse the following week. I sent out a night patrol, 3 of my best rangers. They were supposed to check the old logging camp area and come back by midnight. They never returned. I knew something was wrong when their radio went silent. The last thing we heard was, "Did you hear that clicking sound?" Followed by static. My stomach turned into knots. I grabbed my rifle and headed out to find them. The harvest moon lit up the forest in a creepy red glow. As I walked, I kept finding these weird holes in the ground, like someone or something had been digging tunnels. The holes were fresh, and some were big enough for a person to slip through. Then I smelled it, a horrible smell, like wet dirt mixed with something rotten. Following the scent led me to an old mine entrance. The ground around it was torn up, with those strange claw marks everywhere. And there, hanging from a branch, was John Martinez's radio, still crackling with static. I clicked on my flashlight and went inside the mine. The beam showed me something that made my military training kick in. There were marks on the walls, but not from mining tools. These were smooth, like something had been sliding against the rock over and over. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed back, but then something else echoed too. That clicking sound again, but this time it was coming from all around me, and it was answering. I backed out of there fast, but not before my flashlight caught something moving in the darkness. It was pale, human-shaped but wrong, all stretched out and bent in ways a person shouldn't bend. And its skin looked like tree bark. Back at the ranger station, I called an emergency meeting. While I was telling everyone what I'd seen, we heard screaming from outside. The creatures had followed me back. They were surrounding our station, and we could hear them climbing the walls. The power went out right then. In the darkness, we heard them on the roof, clicking to each other. We were trapped, and they knew it. But I'd been trapped before in Vietnam, and I knew one thing: there's always a way out. What we didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. Those creatures weren't just hunting us. They were testing us, learning about us. And soon, they would show us exactly what they could do. There were 12 of us trapped in the ranger station that night. I could hear the creatures moving around outside, their claws scraping against the walls. Every few minutes, they'd test our defenses, looking for a way in. "Everyone, get away from the windows," I whispered, remembering how these things like to attack from above. Just then, something crashed through the skylight. Glass rained down, and we got our first real look at one of them in the emergency light's glow. It was pale white, longer than a tall man, with arms and legs that bent in strange ways. But what really got me was its face, no eyes. Just these weird bumpy patches that seemed to move when it turned its head. Its skin looked exactly like tree bark, perfect for hiding in the forest. Dr. Helen Phillips, our wildlife expert, was taking pictures when one of the creatures grabbed her. It moved so fast, 1 second she was there. The next, she was gone through the broken skylight. We heard her screams fade into the darkness. "The basement!" I shouted. "There's an old tunnel down there that leads to the mine shaft." It wasn't ideal, but it was our only chance. As we rushed downstairs, I could hear them breaking in through the roof. The basement tunnel was old and narrow. We moved as fast as we could, our flashlights showing the way. But then we heard that clicking sound again. It was coming from both in front and behind us. They had been waiting for this. Peter Walsh, one of my best friends, got hit by some kind of spit or venom. He froze up completely, couldn't move a muscle. Before we could help him, they took him too. Robert Turner tried to save him and met the same fate. We ran. There was nothing else we could do. The tunnel seemed endless, and the clicking sounds were getting closer. I knew these creatures were hurting us somewhere, but we had no choice but to keep moving. Finally, we burst into a huge underground cave. What we saw there made everything else seem like a bad dream. The cave walls were covered with these strange glowing nests, and in the center of the cave was something that still haunts my nightmares. A creature twice the size of the others, their queen. She was surrounded by dozens of these things, all clicking and moving like a single mind. We were down to just 4 people now. Me, 2 rangers, and a local hunter named Gregory. I knew we couldn't fight them all, but I also knew we couldn't let these creatures keep hunting in our woods. I remembered my old military training. If you can't win head-on, change the game. I noticed the cave walls were lined with old mining support beams. That's when I got an idea. "Listen," I whispered to the others. "These tunnels are all connected to the old mine. If we can set charges in the right spots, we can bring it all down." Gregory volunteered to set the charges on the far side. He was the fastest runner among us. But as he made his way around the cave's edge, one of the creatures spotted him. What happened next? Well, let's just say Gregory bought us the time we needed, at a terrible price. While the creatures were distracted, I set the last charge, but their queen sensed what we were doing. She let out this horrible screech that made my head feel like it was splitting open. They all came at us at once. We ran for the exit tunnel, the creatures right behind us. I hit the detonator just as we reached the main shaft. The whole cave system started coming down. The screaming and clicking sounds behind us were deafening. Only 3 of us made it out, and we were all hit by their venom. We spent 2 weeks in the hospital, but we survived. The military came in after that, put up fences, and said the area was quarantined due to chemical contamination. But here's the thing. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear those clicking sounds in the woods. New sinkholes appear every few months. The locals have started telling stories about pale creatures in the trees. I'm still here, mapping every new tunnel we find, working with the military to keep people safe, because I know the truth, we didn't get them all. Somewhere deep under these mountains, they're still down there, waiting, planning, and someday they'll be back. That's my story. Most people don't believe it, and maybe that's for the best. But next time you're in these woods and hear a strange clicking sound, don't look up. Just run. It's been 5 years since that night in the caves. I'm still working as head ranger here, but things are different now. Every morning, I check the new maps showing all the sinkholes and caves we've found. Every night, I listen for that familiar clicking sound. The official story is that Dead Man's Hollow is closed due to unsafe ground conditions. The military keeps a small base nearby, and they say it's just for training. But I know better. We all do. Last month, a young hiker managed to sneak past the fences. We found his camera 2 days later, hanging in a tree. The last photo showed something pale and long-limbed moving between the pines. The hiker was never found. Sometimes, on really quiet nights, I sit on my cabin porch and watch the blood-red harvest moon rise over the trees. The wind still carries strange sounds from the hollow. New trees show those familiar claw marks, higher and higher up their trunks. The locals have new stories now. They talk about the tree people and warn their kids to stay away from holes in the ground. Some say, if you knock on a pine tree at midnight, something knocks back. They're not wrong. I keep my rifle cleaned and ready. My flashlight is always charged, because deep down I know something survived down there in those caves. The clicking sounds are getting closer to town every year. And those sinkholes, they're not just appearing by accident. So if you're ever hiking in the Adirondacks, and you hear something that sounds like wooden wind chimes in a place where there aren't any, don't stop to look. Don't try to take a picture. Just remember my story and run. Run as fast as you can. Because they're still here, still watching, still hunting, and they're getting bolder. My name is Ethan Redford, and I'm about to tell you a story that still gives me nightmares. Even now, at 45, my hands shake when I think about what happened at Shadow Lake last summer. You might know me as the ex-Navy SEAL who now works as a water safety specialist. But what you don't know is why I chose this path. It all started when I was 15. My younger brother Tommy and I were swimming at our local lake. I was supposed to watch him, but I got distracted for just a minute. Just 1 minute, that's all it took. His screams still echo in my mind, the splash of water, and then silence. We never found his body. That day changed everything for me. I promised myself I'd never let another family go through what mine did. Fast forward to August 2024. I was called to the Boundary Waters in Minnesota, specifically to a place called Shadow Lake. 5 swimmers had gone missing in the past month. No bodies found, no traces left. Usually, drowning victims surface within days. But not here. Something was different about these cases. When I first arrived at Shadow Lake, something felt wrong. The water was too cold for summer, and at night, strange green lights danced in the sky like ghostly fingers reaching down to touch the lake. The local rangers were nervous, and the Native Americans in the area flat out refused to go near the water. They kept talking about the deep ones and warned us to stay away. But I couldn't stay away. Not when people were disappearing. Not when families were losing their loved ones, just like I lost Tommy. The lake called to me, but not in a peaceful way. It was more like a challenge, a dark, twisted invitation to uncover its secrets. What I didn't know then was that accepting this challenge would lead me into the darkest chapter of my life. Shadow Lake wasn't just a lake. It was home to something ancient, something hungry, something that should have stayed buried in the depths of forgotten legends. This is the story of what really happened at Shadow Lake, and why some waters should remain undisturbed. My first week at Shadow Lake was strange, to say the least. I put together a small team, 5 experienced people who'd worked with me before. There was Michael Brooks, a local ranger who knew these waters like the back of his hand. Linda Morrison, a marine biologist who studied unusual water patterns. Then there were our divers, Thomas Quinn and the Wilson brothers, James and Andrew. Something wasn't right about the lake from day one. The water was ice cold in patches, even though it was August. Fish were acting weird too, swimming in tight circles, then disappearing into the depths. But what really got to me were the sounds at night. Not regular lake sounds like frogs or birds. No, this was different. Like singing, but not quite human. Our first dive was on a Tuesday morning. The sun was bright, but it barely seemed to penetrate the water's surface. Thomas and I went down first, following the spots where swimmers had last been seen. The water was so dark, our flashlights barely cut through it. About 30 feet down, we found something that made my blood run cold. An underwater cave, its entrance lined with old tribal carvings. But that wasn't the worst part. Inside that cave, we found piles of old clothes, swimming gear from different decades, all torn and rotted. It looked like someone, or something, had been collecting them. Thomas pointed his light at something in the corner, and I'll never forget what we saw. A perfect handprint in the cave wall, but it wasn't human. It was too large, with webbed fingers and what looked like claw marks around it. That night, while we were discussing our findings, Michael spotted something on the lake, a figure standing on the water's surface, glowing with a blue-green light. By the time we grabbed our cameras, it was gone, but we all saw it. Linda started digging through old tribal records, and what she found made us all uneasy. Stories of a water spirit that could change its shape, luring people into the depths. We thought we were investigating drownings. We were wrong, so terribly wrong. That's when the real horror began. The next morning, Michael went out on his routine patrol boat. He radioed in about seeing strange lights under the water. We heard his scream over the radio, then static. By the time we got there, all we found was his empty boat, spinning in the center of a perfectly circular whirlpool that shouldn't have been possible in a lake. The water was hungry now, and we were next on its menu. After losing Michael, everything changed. We couldn't just leave, more people would die if we did, but staying meant facing whatever was in that lake. Linda spent hours reading old Native American stories about the lake spirit, while the rest of us set up cameras around the water. That night, something happened that still haunts me. We were all in the main cabin, going over our plans, when we heard Michael's voice outside. "Hey guys, I need help with the boat." It sounded exactly like him. James jumped up to help, but I grabbed his arm. We all knew Michael was gone. Whatever was out there, it wasn't him. We watched through the window as a figure that looked almost human walked along the shore. But something was wrong with the way it moved, like water flowing in a human shape. Its skin seemed to shine in the moonlight, and when it turned to look at us, I saw gills flickering on its neck. Thomas was the next to go. He insisted on doing one more dive to get pictures of the underwater cave. "We need evidence," he said. I should have stopped him. We watched him go down. Everything normal on his radio for 5 minutes. Then we heard him gasping. "There's something down here. It's... Oh God, it's coming towards me. It's not alone. They're everywhere." His radio went dead. The water where he'd gone down turned black, like ink had been poured into it. When we tried to rescue him, our boats wouldn't start. The creatures, weren't going to let us help him. Linda figured out something important that day. The lake wasn't just home to one monster. It was like a family of them. They could split apart like drops of water and come back together. And they were getting bolder. We tried calling for help, but our phones wouldn't work. The radio only played static and strange singing. We were trapped, and the water was rising. Every night, the lake crept closer to our cabin, even though there hadn't been any rain. The Wilson brothers thought they found a way out, an old hiking trail that led away from the lake. They packed up and left early one morning. We found them that evening, frozen solid near the shore. Somehow, the creatures had turned that part of the lake into ice, even though it was still summer. Linda was next. She discovered something in the old tribal papers, a way to fight these things. But before she could tell us what it was, the water, it just reached out and grabbed her. Right through the dock, like a giant hand made of water. I tried to hold on to her, but the water felt like acid. When I pulled my hands back, they were covered in burns. Now it was just me and Richard Thompson, our local guide, and we knew we had to end this, one way or another. But how do you fight something that controls the very water you need to survive? Richard and I knew we had to act fast. While searching through Linda's papers, we found something important, an old tribal ritual that had to be performed during a lunar eclipse. By some strange luck, there was going to be one that very night. The ritual needed 2 things, an ancient stone necklace we'd found in the underwater cave, and someone brave enough to face the creature in its own home. Richard and I had one shot at this. One chance to end it all. As the moon started to disappear, we took our last working boat to the middle of the lake. The water was pitch black, with those eerie green lights dancing beneath the surface. Richard would stay in the boat with the necklace while I dove down to lure the creature out. "Be careful down there, Ethan," Richard said, his voice shaking. Those were his last words. Just as I was about to dive in, a massive tentacle of water rose up and smashed our boat to pieces. Richard disappeared under the waves with a scream that I'll never forget. I was thrown into the water, but somehow I managed to grab the necklace. The water around me was freezing, and I could feel them coming. Dark shapes moving in the depths, their bodies glowing with that same ghostly light we'd seen before. Then I saw it, their real home, an underwater temple, just like in the tribal stories. As I swam down, the main creature appeared. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once, half human, half fish, with glowing marks across its body and multiple sets of gills that pulsed in the dark. It spoke in my head, using the voices of everyone it had taken. I heard Tommy, Michael, Linda, Richard, all of them begging me to join them. The water around me started to spin, forming a whirlpool that was pulling me down. But I had the necklace, and as the eclipse reached its peak above, I remembered the words Linda had translated. With the last of my air, I spoke them underwater. The necklace began to glow bright red, like it was on fire. The creature screamed, a sound that shook the entire lake. The temple started collapsing, and I saw my chance. I swam into the falling rocks, pushing the creature back into a cave. The rocks sealed it in, but its children were still out there, somewhere in the deep. I barely made it to the surface. When I finally reached the shore, I looked different. My hair had turned completely white, and the water had left strange marks on my skin that glowed in the dark. Shadow Lake is still there, but it's different now. The water never freezes, even in the coldest Minnesota winters. Sometimes, on quiet nights, people still hear singing. The government keeps people away, saying it's for research, but I know the truth. I survived, but at a cost. I can't go near large bodies of water anymore without feeling them watching me. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, I swear my eyes glow just like theirs. Remember this: not all lakes are meant for swimming. Some waters hold secrets better left undisturbed. And if you ever hear singing coming from a dark lake, run. Run as fast as you can. It's been a year since that night at Shadow Lake, and things have never been the same. Sometimes I wake up at night, my sheets soaking wet, even though I haven't been near water. The doctors can't explain why my body temperature stays so cold, or why my hair turned white and won't change back. I tried to tell people what really happened, but who would believe me? The official report says it was a series of unfortunate accidents. They blame strong currents and bad weather. But I know what I saw, and I know what's still out there. The government built a fence around Shadow Lake now. They say they're doing environmental research, but I've seen the armed guards. At night, the water glows with those same strange lights. Fish in nearby lakes have started changing, growing bigger, looking different. Local kids say they sometimes hear singing coming from the water, especially during full moons. Last week, I got a letter from a small town in Alaska. They're having similar problems with their lake. People going missing, strange lights in the water, unusual temperatures. They want my help. Part of me wants to go, to stop what happened at Shadow Lake from happening again. But another part of me knows better. The creatures from Shadow Lake changed me somehow. I can sense water now, feel it calling to me. Sometimes, when I look at my reflection in the mirror, I see hints of scales on my neck. But when I touch my skin, it's normal. Am I becoming like them? I don't know. I still work as a water safety specialist, but only at small pools now. I can't handle big water bodies anymore. The memories are too strong, and the pull is too powerful. But at least I'm alive to tell this story, to warn others. If you ever find yourself near a lake that feels wrong, where the water is too cold, where lights dance beneath the surface, where singing echoes across the waves, don't ignore your instincts. Run. Run far away, because not all water is safe, and not all lakes are empty. And remember, if you hear someone you know calling you from the water, someone you're sure couldn't be there, don't answer. Don't even look back. Just run. The creatures of Shadow Lake are still out there, waiting, hunting, growing stronger. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if they're looking for me too.